What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. I honestly don't think Pokemon would be as popular as it is if they had not nailed the starters back in the beginning. It's an easy-to-understand relationship with endearing, unique creatures that all turn into something really cool and useful. But as we know, the starters are meant to be a tough choice, because not only will your rival pick one and taunt you with the options that you failed to choose, but also any friends that bought the game who might lean in a different way, so it's all good fun. However, since each generation comes with its own set of starters, it means that the balance of how these starters interact is going to be a bit different. And therefore, some versions of the grass, fire, or water starter is going to be better or worse in comparison from the last time. Obviously, that would impact their performance in the overall game structure, but here I just wanted to focus on the starter trios themselves and see which ones have been constructed to be the least balanced of them all. So ironically, as far as perfect balance goes, we can look directly at the Johto and Galar regions, since these starters are all pure solo typed, remaining solid grass, fire, and water. This may be considered boring by fans, but these three types all have an advantage in one direction that they resist, and a weakness in the other direction that resists them. There can, of course, be a discussion about coverage moves, like you could teach Meganium Earthquake to actually be able to deal with a Typhlosion, but then Feraligatr learns Ice Fang to deal with that, and so on. So we could go in circles there, but as far as balance, which to me, for the starters, means that they have one counterpart they're good against and one they're bad against, having the pure options fulfills this role pretty spectacularly. Then again, the stat spreads could impact their relationship to a large degree, but we can come back to that if they're too egregious later on. Almost like those regions are the Unova starters, since Serperior and Samurott are once again pure typed. However, the fire type Imbor throws us a curveball with the fighting type being added. Maybe not a huge surprise after having that combination the previous 2 generations, but it's not a bad typing, and really it doesn't interfere at all with grass or water in any way. That does mean that the Mega Fire Pig could be susceptible to, say, an Aerial Ace or some other move that the starters could learn, but I'm not sure that really matters when Imbor is going to be crashing all over the place, losing its own health anyway. So, past that 3 are the Kanto and Hoenn regions that have one starter apiece that stayed pure, while the other 2 adopted new typings later on, such as Kanto making Charizard a flying type and Venusaur being poison, which is actually unique as the only poison starter to date. Well, besides Poipole, I guess, but with Blastoise staying pure water the whole time. That being said, the poison doesn't really do anything against water, however, it does in fact give Venusaur a neutral stab attack to defend against Charizard, which it will kind of need because the flying type makes Charizard quad resist grass, which does change things a bit, but it also makes them quad weak to rock, so if Blastoise happens to pick up a rock slide, you're in pretty big trouble. Too bad Venusaur can't get any rock moves. But it is worth noting this dynamic changes when they all Mega Evolve, mostly because Charizard weakens the water no matter what, with either Drought or just becoming an outright Dragon type. So that skews things quite a bit, but it's not as if Megas are around anymore, so it's not quite the debacle that it used to be. As for Hoenn here, the quad weaknesses are baked into the inherent types, since Swampert being water and ground is 4 times weak to grass, which just so happens to be the one thing Sceptile has in spades, being a grass type. No outside typed moves needed. Now the ground of Swampert does give it another tool to take down Blaziken if it wants, but it's not as if it had to jump through hoops before as a water type. Nor does ground resist fire, so it doesn't impact much against our chicken friend, but then again, neither does its fighting type, not having any bearing on the other 3 types that we've already mentioned. Now of course there are coverage moves all around. Swampert can get Ice Beam, and then Sceptile can get Acrobatics as well, but once again, we should note that the Mega Evolution Dragon type exists, since Sceptile got an upgrade to take neutral fire damage and quad resist water. So it does alter the balance of this trio, but again, Megas aren't really a concern these days, so let's look more into the other setups that are designed to subvert their balance, starting with Sinnoh. Now depending on who you ask, Sinnoh is highly unbalanced, but let's just look at that, shall we? Now, the big news here is Empoleon being water and steel, making it the only steel-type starter so far, so that's pretty impressive. However, it does mean that Empoleon now takes neutral hits from grass, which would be a problem if Torterra hadn't gained the ground typing to still be super effective against it. And funnily enough, that ground typing now gives Torterra a way to take out the fire-type starter Infernape. So that might sound unfair for the world's turtle to get double, until you remember that Infernape is also a fighting type, thus giving it a way to take out the Steel Empoleon. Now true, the Steel type does make Empoleon take neutral fire damage, but really who's gonna be using fire when you could activate this monkey's Furious Fists? So that doesn't leave Empoleon with any inherent advantage over Torterra, but being grass and ground means that any single one of the many ice attacks Empoleon can learn should be plenty enough to take it out. So it's not perfect, and the initial type matchups are quite affected by the additions here, but honestly I love it. Each one of these starters has reliable ways of countering both of the others. Sure, the stats of speed versus defenses means that it might not be considered totally even, but with the right luck, or maybe just a focus sash, you could get a KO on the starter that you're supposedly weak to, debatably making these Sinnoh starters the most balanced since they all counteract each other, which not many trios can realistically claim. Another region that kind of does this is the latest Paldea region, as in their final stages the Pokémon not only have the traditional type flow, but also kind of work in reverse too. See, Meowscarada is a dark type, so that's good, but it also makes it super effective against Skeledirge, who is part ghost type. So then Grass has a leg up on the fire starter. But Quaquaval is also part fighting type, meaning that the water also has a leg up on the grass. So this was clearly intentional. Now this trio isn't perfect because Ghost and Fighting aren't really opposites. I mean, the Ghost will be immune to this Dancing Duck's fighting moves, but Ghost is not super effective against fighting. So Skeledirge is kind of let down by this setup. Not that it doesn't have coverage moves to help it out, but this might have been done on purpose to get people to choose other things besides the best starter that we've seen in a long while. Now, a region that does this arguably even more so is Kalos, which only reinforces the trio's relationships because the additional types only point in the same direction as the initial starter types, with Dark beating Psychic, which beats Fighting, which beats Dark. The only downside is that Dark is totally immune to Psychic instead of just resisting it, so it's not fully equal all around and really doesn't help all that much when you all have two ways to take down your designated target, but also two weaknesses coming straight from the other side. This model was seemingly also attempted to a lesser efficiency in the Hisui region, since Decidueye becomes a fighting type, making it doubly effective against the new Water and Dark Samurott, who is doubly effective against the Fire and Ghost Typhlosion. It's interesting that 2022 gave us two different Fire and Ghost starters in the same year, but they basically used the same supplemental type trios as Gen 9 and just kind of rearranged it a bit. But once again, the Ghost is not super effective against fighting, so even if it is immune, it's not as fun as actually getting a new way to obliterate them like everyone else has. Who would have thought that these little guys could change so much? However, since we did mention Decidueye, we should look into the Alola region, because they take this same kind of theory and pretty discernibly misapply it. Take a look at Primarina, for instance. Nothing inherently wrong with it, this mermaid still remains the only fairy-type starter so far. So in a vacuum, that would make it super effective against Incineroar's dark type being added, which in turn would make it super effective against Decidueye's original ghost typing, but that's where the cycle ends. Ghost is not super effective against Fairy, so Decidueye just is left out in the cold. It's not even immune to Fairy like it was with Fighting, so Primarina just gets free neutral stab Fairy moves to use against the grass starter, while Incineroar is stuck with two different kinds of resisted attacks to try against it. But it's not actually all that bad, since Incineroar's Fire combined with the Dark cancels out the Fairy weakness to neutral as well, so it's back to just worrying about the water. But then clearly it has a double advantage to lord over the Emerald Archer. This seems insanely unfair to leave Decidueye doubly weak to one starter, and none of the other secondary types allowing that to happen for its counterparts. It's honestly shocking that Rowlet was so popular given how stacked it seems to be against it. Maybe they made the Fighting Hisui variant on purpose to fix everything about its relationships, because honestly that goes a long way in doing so. Even if Fire and Dark still doesn't line up with Fairy exactly, it's still better than them trying to shoehorn Ghost into trios where it doesn't fit. Ghost just doesn't have enough matchups in general to be useful here, and given the much more dominant hidden abilities for the other two, it could be possible for the Alola starters to be some of the most unbalanced that we have seen to date. However, if we are looking at abilities, then I do think it's fair to take a second glance over at the Kalos starters, because they have one of the most most favored Pokemon to ever exist in Greninja. While Chestnut and Delphox are strong in their own right, Greninja not only has its own special unique form from the anime, but it also has Protean, which actually allows it to become any type there is, thus throwing the type chart out the window. Instead of Fire, Water, Grass, it's now Fire, Poison, Grass, or Rock, or even normal, just whatever they feel like. I'm not sure how we could possibly consider that balanced. And to be fair, Cinderace technically has a copy of this ability, but it's not quite as prominent, and also its bland monotype counterparts leaves it with a lot less room for creating chaos, not like if Greninja, say, suddenly became a flying type randomly to destroy Chestnut. Granted, both of Greninja's fantastic abilities got nerfed in Gen 9 because they finally realized how unbalanced it was, but that still leaves it just slightly unfair versus getting totally washed out. So as far as actual typings of starters go, Alola could use some improvements, but when one starter can suddenly break the chain that is supposed to define all of them, leaving it good against both of the other starters and another poor starter possibly ultra weak to both of the other two, I think we can safely say that that trio would be the most unbalanced. If they were ever in a Let's Go or Legend style game without abilities, then we could take a look back at them again to reassess. What do you think is the most unbalanced starter trio? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!